we have Divo Okori in the studio with us. Hi, Divo.
Good morning, Val. Good morning, Lagos. Cool ease of lockdown phase two.
Phase two, he says, for 4 weeks. Oh, by the way, how are you feeling about the relaxation?
Well, mixed feelings. I guess our listeners will be expressing their views as the
Mm-hmm.
time goes on.
Please do that by sending messages on WhatsApp. Our WhatsApp number is 0809 444 0981. That's our WhatsApp number for messages. We're streaming live on YouTube, so please go to YouTube right now, youtube.com/smooth981 FM Lagos. Type that and you would find us there. And please subscribe so when we come on live, you get to know first. The story we'll get into from the Punch newspaper. We can't reopen churches, mosques now. That's what Lagos, Ogun, Oyo, Bekiti saying they have relaxed their. Oyo is yet to relax the ban. Ogun is going to meet with the religious leaders to decide. Lagos State says it's not possible for them to rule up that. To actually open up churches at the moment because some religious leaders are saying they can't necessarily enforce, or they don't see how it's going to be possible to enforce social distance and some of the regulations. What do you think, Divo?
Well, this is an update on yesterday's position by the presidential PTF when they did relax the concerns worship centers. And the states have been reacting because PTF did say that in this too, the states, the federal government would be relying on the state government to coordinate and handle this aspect. And what people need to understand here is that some took it as if the federal government was abdicating or shirking responsibility, but actually, see, the federal government doesn't have the arms and legs. They act as oversight and supervision. However, the state governments, who are closer to you, do have the organs of the arms and legs, the ministries, the staffing, etc., to be able to. So, given that extent, many of the state governments who have a better understanding of their own perimeters and their own indices have taken up to look at how to go about implementing this, and it's totally left to their discretion. Now, what this means is in Lagos already, Lagos state government did release, I think, last night that there will still be a hold on worship centers.
Yeah.
That we still need to review the modalities. This is also the same case. AKT also still maintain their lockdown on worship centers. Um, uh, Kaduna also said they've been methodically approaching this lockdown. They've reviewed it that despite they would um, still maintain that lockdown. As you know, even in some other states like in Jigawa and Kano, they had relaxed the lockdown on some 10 days. So they've tailored it to their own needs. Ogun State said they would meet religious leaders. So state governments nationwide will be discussing more fervently with the worship centers to see how they can work out these modalities. I think in another story, we'll break down the real challenge there.
Let's go there directly. Let's talk
Okay.
about how the federal government first they made recommendations that there should be relaxation of the lockdown to ensure that religious activities resume. This is published in the Premium Times newspaper. The presidential task force said that under the new guidelines, because as of yesterday when we broke the story, that the federal government had announced the new phase of lockdown, extending the curfew to start instead of usual 8 p.m., 10 p.m., 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. This time around, at the time of breaking the story, the religious leaders were still waiting, especially the churches, Christians, were waiting for the modalities rolled out by the federal government. So the presidential task force, under these new guidelines that they released concerning the lockdown, worship centers will only be permitted to operate for a maximum of 1 hour each time they meet. That's like asking anybody to restrict types of worship and re-strategize or reform their mode of worship. But as we've seen in the reaction from these other states, how do you see, on a general spectrum, for the federal, the government of Nigeria, for the whole of the country, how is it going to be applied?
Well, let's just look at what the PTF did recommend. Remember, these are recommendations for the state governments to adopt. Now, each state government would look at its own case and review it. Now, from the federal government position, remember, on the other items, the curfew has been expanded. It's no longer at 8 p.m. It's now from 10 p.m. to
For
4 a.m. in the morning. Aviation is still on lockdown till I think June
21.
21st for local flights. Education still on lockdown until modalities are put in place. And interstate lockdown also will be. Now, for worship centers, which has been eager on people's mind. Now, take a list. I'm going to go through a few of them so that people understand. Now, whilst we are saying this, what I want people to bear in mind is understanding that public areas of public gathering, the hazard involved here that when you get together within enclosed parameters, the likelihood for transmission is very high.
Yes.
Okay, and where you cannot control that. So, for those who argue, oh, markets are open, but churches can't open, worship centers, mosques can't open, you need to look at how in the markets it's an open air environment. Even if you cough or you sneeze, the droplets are likely to be carried away by wind, as against when you're in an enclosed environment and you can't control those numbers. But some of the modalities the federal government has put in place for churches to open is one, they've said this will last for 1 month. Okay, then the timing of worship centers can only operate between 5 a.m. and 8 p.m. Secondly, they're only meant to have 1 hour services, and for those who have several services, a 30-minute interlude for contamination and disinfection. Okay?
For the next set of worshippers.
For the next set of worshippers. This is almost same applied to aviation. Also, children are not allowed because it will be hard to control them. Two, social distancing in terms of spacing. Everybody must be at least 2 meters apart, which reduces the numbers of people who can attend, depending if you have a closed environment that has a fixed volume that it can contain. Two, churches and worship centers, mosques as well, must put in place some of the non-pharmaceutical interventions like and exit points. Then also a register where you take the number and details of those who have attended. Now, this is the part that's difficult because what I want to do is that if they allow such congregations, okay, and there is a breakout and one is tested positive, contact tracing will need to take place. And I know this is tough because whilst we have small churches that have numbers from 100 to 200 and 100, there are mega churches that have volumes to the capacity of 5,000 and even 10,000. So how are you going to carry this out? Secondly, they say that congregants must use face masks. And, whilst the federal government is acting on science, okay, many of worship, worship is a function, or faith-based worship is a function of subjective views. Many of them believe that the spiritual angle to it should be able to cover them and not allow them. There's no need to be able to wear. Even some clergy have spoken strongly against that. Why should we adopt these measures? Isn't your power or your spiritual strength enough to be able to cover you? So you can see the challenge here when it comes to when science comes against the spiritual concepts. They've even said that if a church can have an open air service, it would be better, because in the open air service or drive-in services, as it is abroad, everybody sits within their cars and then you listen to an open air open air sermon. People are looking at this. Two, temperature checks at every point, and then they should leave their windows open. So for those who have closed environments or have been used to using air conditions, how are you going to keep those number of people within a closed environment without air conditioning? I mean, that's just tantamount to a lot of discomfort, especially even though we're in the rainy season. We know it gets hot in different areas in the country. So I do appeal to Nigerians as a whole. The federal government obviously is not attempting to, state governments, they're not trying to keep their own citizens locked down. Trust me, for a government that doesn't have much to offer in terms of revenue to give everybody some kind of society, social safety nets, they're actually eager, if given a personal position, to let people back to their normal lives. But they must, as government, consider the health considerations and act responsibly. So it's going to take a lot of not just appealing, a lot of working together and sensitization for people to come to terms with the measures that have to be taken to be able to ensure that we balance how we go forward with our various lives.
Thank you, Devo. Speaking of balance and speaking in economic terms, one would understand why the government will probably lean into pressure to open up hospitality businesses, banks, and all that because of the economy, just to see that the economy is robust and they still pump the system. But in terms of churches, I mean, shouldn't be concerned, the primary concern be the care and safety and health of the congregants? Because how do you rationalize opening up churches if we're going to start leaning into pressure? Is there an economic value to this? First of all, we know how difficult it is. You've already listed out the recommendations or the conditions for why each church should be allowed to open. Do you think marking attendance registers? Do you think opening windows for tents or churches, church auditoriums that are primarily meant for air conditioning for their own source of ventilation? How do you see this possible? Because it's almost because with the listing out of all the recommendations or all these conditions for reopening, it's almost impossible for a conventional church to operate. So should the concern be about opening the churches, or shouldn't the concern be about the health and safety of the congregants?
Yes. Now, you see, every area of concern that we raise, at the end of the day, what is important is the decision that is taken, okay? Which is why government is speaking and talking to many of the clergy, the faith-based leaders, okay? Especially for two major faiths within the nation, because remember, there are also other forms of
Right,
worship practice, traditional worship, and those who don't even believe. So government views it from a point of, this is a public gathering that might be hazardous in light of COVID, okay, and community transmission. The worshippers and members see it from a base of, I believe, from my own take, that our spirituality can cover for this. So it's the balance that has to be struck at the end of the day. And we, at all times, government will act responsibly to ensure that it protects itself.
Thank you.
And citizens.
And citizens, of course. MI from Akoka sent a message here on WhatsApp. He said, I must particularly commend Lagos State government for this very bold move. Most states aren't making data-driven decisions, but falling to political pressure. If you can't keep all the ducks in a row, there's no need to go swimming. A cool lockdown. Oh, thank you, MI. Patrick Chololu says, government is insisting that schools and religious houses remain closed, but they are not telling enough. Is that how we're going to remain? Where's the hope of those whose employment area tied to schools and religious houses? What's the hope for them? Vincent Emeka from Adeba says, I doubt if the guidelines given by the Presidential Task Force will be obeyed by the worship centers. Chill says, and the noise we would get when the religious gatherings have open services that we back to the sound pollution nuisance now. Which came from AJCD says, good morning, Smith FM. The federal government and Lagos State government should stop confusing people. Please, how will private school teachers cope? Because I'm one. We are the worst hit right now in Nigeria. No salary for 2 months, and our government counterparts are receiving their alerts monthly. Let's move on to talk about money. That's a nice segue for this story. The Guardian newspaper reports that on 2020 budget, Senate increases oil benchmark to $28 per barrel. Remember that they had increased to the $25 per barrel benchmark now proposed by the executive in the revised term expenditure framework that's called NTEF and fiscal strategy paper forwarded for approval. With this adjustment, do you think the budget will be able to survive, seeing that there's more borrowing coming up?
Well, the Senate Committee on Finance did make their pronouncements on their review of the MTEF, the medium term expenditure framework, as well as the fiscal strategy paper. Okay, now this is like a breakdown of how the budget expenditure and revenue is going to take place, and one of the highlights was the increment on the benchmark. That's the oil benchmark from $25, which was proposed, to $20, and at some time it was even 20. Now the some of the reasons the chairman gave, that's Senator Solomon Lekon, he did say that the Brent price was at its highest, was a slump in the oil price. It went as low as $15 for some time, globally, because of the skirmishes that took place between Saudi and Russia. It brought down the oil price. Now, to this extent, federal government did make some strategic adjustments on the budget, given that revenues being oil, being our highest revenue earner, would not be coming in. Now, they did say that also the oil production rates would also be decreased as well, from 1.9 barrels that was proposed to about 1.9 million barrels per day to about 1.8 million barrels per day. Okay, given the fact also that OPEC cuts were still expected,
Yes.
which were done to show up the oil price globally. Now, some of the factors remain the same that was proposed. Exchange rate at 369 to the dollar, inflation about 14%, approximate growth rate on GDP about 4.42%. And other indicators left. Budget expenditure brought down, I think it was around 11, 12, brought down to about 10.5 trillion, with the borrowing set at 4 trillion. That's foreign and domestic borrowing. The deficit about 4.9 trillion naira, and then expected projected FG revenue about 5.9 trillion. Now the thing is this, right? Obviously, this move must be made because the parameters have changed. Now, the federal government did have to step down the benchmark because it's obvious that at the time it was $15 hovering 15.20. We were not too sure whether this would improve anytime soon. Definitely it would improve, but I think that what most experts do say is that government should remain a conservative position for many reasons. And the conservative position is what this does is when you err on caution and you project that you might not earn as much, then it means you're not going to spend as much, given for many reasons. One, you're not certain as to what would happen in the future, okay? Because if you project it higher and then it comes lower, that's a loss and higher and more pressure. Two, in terms of planning, remember already because of the lower revenues, the president had pushed that the Orange report be implemented, which is more or less reducing the size of government. Okay, those are all steps taken to be able to reduce the fiscal burden on the government. Thirdly, we have a huge deficit. Okay, even though we're pushing for debt servicing. Spreading or even removal in some quarters. There's a huge weight on the government revenue. So when you spend less for the federal government, already if anything comes above the benchmark, it goes to the excess crude account (ECA). What I expect in the future is that the legislator move to kind of put a framework around the ECA, because remember last time what normally happens is that the ECA just accumulates the excess and then it's shared amongst the federation, federal, state, and local government.
Yes.
So maybe they could put it to maybe social infrastructure, which has been in dire need because we don't have much for capital expenditure. So the more we have for capital expenditure, the better for the country.
And we can't keep borrowing to fund
Yes, we can't keep borrowing.
Like
so the thing is, we hope in the course of time that the oil price maintains its north position. Yes, it brings in more oil, more revenue for the government. But we want government to remain conservative, at least for the time being. It's when you're conservative, that's when less errors are made. Because if you rest on your oil, more money is coming and you increase the expenditure, we set ourselves up for another failure in the future.
I'll ask you the same question I asked Rotus this morning earlier for Business Express 91. In the light of this conversation, the government had cut down the budget for, or rather reduced the budget allocation for health and some other sector just to cushion, some other areas, especially even in cuts. I know cuts, they reduced the budget, the money that was requested by the Senate for the renovation process of about 30 something, about 36 billion, reduced it to 7. Is this the best time to cut the budget for health?
You see,
is the most sensitive time to do that.
First of all, what I want to say is that budget is numbers and planning. Okay. Yes, we're facing a health crisis with COVID, a pandemic, so it seems as if health is taking attention. However, across board, there will be cuts. All right. Now, remember, this budget is the ability of government to deliver on its mandates. Okay. So what I expect is for citizens to work through their legislator to be able to impress on them which areas of the budget will impact most on them. And I think one we know for is social infrastructure. And social infrastructure refers to power, number one, health, education, road and transport. Okay. Now, these areas obviously should get the most attention and include security. Okay. We must not forget that. So how we go about dividing or allocating that should be in the interest of Nigerians. So, like I said, government will take its position, but I will ask citizens to play their role and impress on their legislator where the cuts should be made. Because remember, our desires and our needs are infinite, but our supply, which is our revenue,
It's
is
not.
limited.
Thank you, Defoe. That's a good line, a good payoff. Now, in the light of still having this conversation on budgets and in monetary terms, the Lagos state government has cut down, or Lagos House of Assembly precisely has passed a resolution to reduce the size of the state's 2020 budget from 1.68 trillion naira down to 920.5 billion naira. Obviously, because of the challenges brought by COVID-19. Our governor, Babachide Sanwo-Olu, made this announcement. The news agent of Nigeria reports that the clerk of the House, Mr. Aziz Sani, had read the letter from the governor requesting that reduction in the budget. How significant is this reduction for Lagos State as a whole?
Well, currently it was at 1.68 trillion before. Now it's come down below that mark to about 920, and this is a proposal that the State Assembly will be approving. Now, this doesn't come as a surprise, as we do know, with a lockdown of over 2 months, economic activity within the state has been reduced
Yes.
greatly. I think they've even cut it so much. The percentage is not high. However, Lagos is kind of lucky being the commercial capital of the nation, with 60% of the economic activity taking place here. So remember, Lagos State's on its own. I'm sure with time they will be coming out with some of their positions, some kind of stimulus package for businesses, both corporates and SMEs, in terms of the taxation, fees, levies, etc., and gold moratorium extensions, to help buffer economic activity within the state governments. And also remember, we're not in isolation in terms of tourism, which Lagos makes a lot on, with the lockdowns interstate as well as nationally, both at the borders and airspace. It impacts heavily on Lagos. So there's more information to come from this, but this move from the House is not unexpected. What's required, or the objective, is that Lagos will look at a balance between increasing economic activity, boosting economic activity, and ensuring that the healthcare of the life of visitors and residents of Lagos State is protected.
How do you feel about the new plan by the Lagos State government vis-a-vis this conversation we just had now? The plan to adopt a new housing policy. They talked about this last year. They mentioned it again earlier this year before COVID-19 hit. But as if they've been going through, with the plans, and it's almost gone to, it has gotten to execution stage. Now implementation is what we'll discuss. They are going to establish, housing plans for Lagosians. They say it's in single digits. What sort of worker, or what would I say level, level of staff or worker would be able to afford such housing in Lagos? I mean, seeing that we have a housing deficit in Lagos going to over 70%, if I'm correct.
Yes, housing is some refer to it as a fundamental right, and among the sustainable goals, everybody's meant to be housed at some point. Now, obviously the challenge here is the propensity or capacity of citizens, and here we're referring to civil servants, to be able to own their own homes eventually. Now, in the past, when Nigeria had a lot of liquidity, what used to happen was government would build homes at different levels: low income housing, medium income housing, and then for senior staff, and give it to them. And at some case, when liquidity wasn't so high, you would pay off in the course of time. All right. But because those parameters have changed and liquidity is not as available, they are adopting some private sector approach to it, which is by issuing what they're proposing as single digit mortgage packages, whereby civil servants are given an amount within their levels, which will allow you to acquire a mortgage, which pays for a house. All right. Now, across time, they haven't broken down the full parameters, but for here, what they're looking at is where you pay an initial 5% down payment for the house, and your repayments across 10 years cannot exceed 33.5% of your salary.
Yes.
Which is how some private sector operators are doing this. So what it does is you're able to get the house, and across a space of 10 years,
Pay them back.
yes, as long as you're employed, you'll be able to pay back
Mm.
for these homes. So in the long run, it takes the weight off government to be able to purchase homes, outright purchase homes for their civil servants. And what it does, it also, because when you're able to provide this package for civil servants, it gives them, it boosts their confidence. It gives them hope that their work and their efforts are not in vain.
Mm-hmm.
That at the
And
end of the
they
day,
find some sort of balance.
yes, that at the end of the day,
Yeah.
all my efforts put to work, at least I can leave
Mm.
with something. So it is a very laudable affair,
Yeah.
and I think Lagos is in the right capacity to do this given their position within our country.
So who can afford this?
No, that's why I said the parameters and terms. So it's not just one amount for everyone. At your levels, if you're at a lower
So there's something for everyone.
yes, there's something for everyone.
Awesome.
You will buy within what you can afford
Mm.
within 10-year spread.
So they cut your quotes according to your
Your
cloth.
size, yes.
Premium Times has a story. Senate approves Buhari's $5.5 billion loan request. You know, they had rejected it before because they weren't clear on the terms. The details were not, very clear to them. But now it seems clearer as they represented it to the House, and the Senate says, okay, that's fine. You go. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, we've said this without number. Nigeria is challenged in terms of revenue, and the federal government is seeking means to be able to, finance the budget. And we had said this before about $1.4 billion that was coming from the IMF, which was our contribution. Then the World Bank was to give us about 1.5 billion, and I think the money from the AFDB was reduced to about $500 million. Then about 103 million coming from the IDB. Islamic Development Bank.
Yes.
All this is geared at making sure they deliver on the budget. And remember, many of those who are lending to Nigeria, unlike before, the lending terms have changed. It's not a free, just take the cash and go. Nigeria has had to stipulate and even create some modalities, which was what the Senate wanted to hear, as to how this money will be spent. And in some cases, it doesn't even come to government, it goes straight to the operator to ensure that all our issues of diversion or all the complications that normally do come with government expenditure are secured. So we look forward to its full implementation, and hopefully globally, if the economy improves, so will the social economy of Nigerian citizens.
I like how you connected that story, and actually links very nicely with this one. I'm going to ask you a question. I would expect you to just give me a very simple answer in a short sentence, as short as possible. Buhari's assurance to the AFDB president, Akin Additional, how does that resonate with you? What do you feel about that? So we're strongly behind you.
No, I'm excited because if you remember when he first came in, the president didn't really make many appointments from his own party. Many of the JJ appointees are still there, which Additional won, and he supported it on his entry. So we give him kudos for that. Remember, as leading the AFDB, even though we're the largest stakeholder, it gives Nigeria a strong stand in the foreign space.
Yes.
Now that there are geopolitical allegations coming, it is very commendable that the government is standing with him resolutely and working with all the stakeholders, to ensure that he is re-elected. So we stand with the president on that position. We do know that it's not so much of the individuals in Western, it's about the nation as a whole and our standing as a formidable sovereignty, and hopefully as the big brother of Africa, we will continue in a leadership position.
Do you think Nigeria is going to pull out like other African countries are doing? Yesterday, I think yesterday I know that 2 countries are pulled out from the World Health Organization. It has similar connections, but saying that the US was primarily laying these allegations against the AFDB. Is Nigeria still going to align with the West?
What I'll say is this: this is kudos to the presidential appointment of the chief of staff, that is Professor Gambari.
Yes.
He is an astute man in geocontinental politics and diplomacy. I'm sure the president is getting the best advice as to our position on that.
Right.
Remember, we are beneficiaries of many of these international bodies, so we will play a very good balancing act and ensure that our presence and our positive reputation is maintained.
You speak like a politician, Joe. Thank you for your answer. Special thanks to everybody who sent in messages on WhatsApp, on YouTube. Bufa says the ideal should be that the religious bodies to ask, or should be the religious bodies should ask their congregants to still be at home. The online medium appears to have been working so far. The reason behind opening religious fora appears suspect. All right, stay with us here on Smooth. Next, we talk sports. Good morning.
The stories,
Hold on.
the